Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us once more. It's great to see so many people joining yet again from around the world. So a huge heartfelt thank you to everybody out there for supporting the Light Lunch series. First of all, just a quick introduction. I'm obviously Paul Nulty. I'm going to be joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Emilio and Seraphina, who will be giving this presentation to you. Just a couple of quick reminders from me. Obviously, we are hosting these webinars every week, twice a week, on Tuesdays and Fridays as well. So, and to anybody that joined us on Tuesday, just gone, deepest apologies. We had a few technical glitches, it's fair to say. So the Magic Movie Moments webinar will now be given on, I believe, the 11th of May. So please do keep an eye out. Please do come back, join us. It's a really interesting webinar that talks about a lot of things that happen off camera as well. So there's lots of really good anecdotes in that presentation. Obviously, if you want to find out more about the Light Lunch series, you can go to our website, www.nultylighting.co.uk, or you can find out a whole load more about us on the usual social media channels at Nulty Lighting. That's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Seraphina and Emilio. If you have any questions, I'm afraid to say you've got me moderating today, so I will be taking your questions. Thank you very much, and I will talk to you at the end, I guess. Good luck, guys. Take care.
Great. Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks for moderating, and a mixed reception there on the introduction music, so we'll review that afterwards. I've really enjoyed researching this with Seraphina, and struggled not to disappear down a sort of YouTube and research wormhole, really, and to try and keep on track and give it some structure. But I was actually asked to write a short piece on this topic back in January, and the future's changed quite a lot since then. So if you can please be understanding, this is a sort of thought experiment in some places, so we try to allow ourselves a bit of creative freedom.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul, and thanks, Emilio. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. It's so nice to see names appearing from all the various corners of the world. So on to speculative design, the future of light and lighting. Emilio and I are both huge history and science buffs, so we thought it might be good to collaborate on a thought piece, as he said, discussing what the future of our world of lighting looks like. We are by no means experts in speculative design. Our research is very much gleaned from mildly obsessive reading, mostly discussion and observation of trends around in our own practice. So we've structured today's Light Lunch as very much an informal talk. Do send in lots and lots of questions and comments, and we are very much looking forward to develop our research further. So any tidbits that you may have read, any articles of note, your own research, in fact, is very much welcome. So we'll begin with a short discussion on product design in the world of lighting. We'll touch upon innovation vis-a-vis products like the Philips Hue or the Sora GAN, and on wireless controls. We'll follow this up with a bit of history on speculative lighting design. This will be followed then by a piece on the more recent revolutions in the world of lights, such as electric conductive paint, which is all very exciting, and what that means for our industry. Once we've situated ourselves in this world of speculation and futuristic ideology, we shall then conclude our talk with what we see as our vision for the future of light and lighting.
So products and technology are inextricably linked to lighting, so it's an easy place to begin. We're going to look at a couple of recent innovations, as Sarah said, and what strikes me more recently when talking about this is the crossover between scientific research and tech. Design is becoming more specialized all the time. Designers need to be a mix of creative and technology savvy hybrid, and we're often specifying things now that have started life in a lab, and then they form part of our day-to-day toolkit. So looking here at the Hue, other sort of color controllable Wi-Fi light sources are available, but we take an example of Giorgiani. He's an engineer from Philips, from their innovation lab, and in 2011, he was asked to, from his superiors, to devise something or create a device that would make a splash. And it's led to this product. And the reason we look at it, and there's dozens of products that we could look at, is it's really created a new market for consumer lighting design in the home. It uses new technologies like wireless control and LED. And I think that the risk is that we take this for granted at the moment. If you could have conceived that, when the LED was formed, that 60 years later we'd be able to specify something like this from a platform called Amazon, then you would have thought someone was mad. But we'd have to take a step back and understand how we got to that point. So LED was invented by Nick Holonyak in the early 1960s when he was an engineer at GE. And the reason it's kind of groundbreaking or very innovative is that it's creating light out of a new medium through the semiconductor instead of using phosphor or filaments. And it was a long time before this became a consumer product or even had any consumer uses in mind. It was, thought it might be used for telecommunications or things like that before it could become the solution to lighting today as we know it. So our talk today, we look to explore technology that's similar to the LED in the 1960s, might seem a bit odd or a bit redundant, or perhaps not have an application in the consumer world, and see if we can make that leap. The bulk of our talk does deal with the future of light and lighting, but also I think it's quite important to sort of look back at the history of things as we do this, and we will also take a step back even further to see what products made it through and what the kind of pressures were on them to become successful or not.
That's very true. I mean, speaking of tech that the industry found quite odd, weird even initially, the Sora GAN and GAN is a really good example of how something from academia managed to make it to practice. Seen here in this slide is Dr. Shuji Nakamura, who's a Nobel laureate. We all know him as the inventor of the blue laser. But together with Dr. Stephen Den-Bars, who's the founder of NITES, and Dr. James Speck of the UC Santa Barbara's College of Engineering, they came up with an LED technology platform that was completely different from industry practice in 2007. Most considered gallium nitride on gallium nitride, or GAN on GAN, to be impossible to execute. But, I'm going to compare this to Tony Stark's arc reactor, because the nerd in me wants to do that. This tech did make it to fruition, and it now outperforms everyone else on the market who's still dealing with sapphire or silicon carbide substrates. The Sora light engine, GAN on GAN light engine, can provide near sunlight-like color rendering and wavelength distribution. It's making waves in the field of human-centric lighting, but in 2007, these three were considered a bit mad. A similar thing is remote phosphor. Emilio, over to you.
Well, I mean, yeah, not to dwell on it too long, but there's different applications for ways that we can drive LED. And as light designers, we often just specify, a product with remote phosphor or a product with a chip on board, and we don't really think about the sort of variety of different sort of backgrounds that those things come from. And this is where it gets interesting, but also difficult for us to kind of fully understand the future, because we're influenced by very technically savvy rain or industry background and the OEMs that provide us with all our fixtures. But the remote phosphor, for example, is a way of driving the LED harder to create a more efficient source, as opposed to being focused on creating the higher color rendering and the higher spectrum of light. And again, without wanting to dwell on it too long, we're discovering these things as we go along, and as we specify products or we pick them apart, we sort of have to try and understand, well, why was that made like that? Why was that developed like that? And it gets quite complicated.
Absolutely. And I think when you speculate, it's important to know what in the past actually did make it to the future being now for us. But it's almost cliche, I think, to say that the LED has changed the world of lighting to the point where it's unrecognizable to someone from the 1960s, for example. And it's quite astounding to see how far we've come in quite a short amount of time. So now that we've done, we've touched upon light fittings for a little bit, I think maybe it's best that we discuss lighting controls, because those have also catapulted the world of lighting forward these past 40 years.
Yeah, Sarah and I often have tutorials at work or discussions where we end up picking up on these things and they tend to go arms and legs. But why don't we start with the development of wireless controls, Sarah, because that's all the rage at the moment.
Agreed, absolutely. I mean, it's a list that keeps getting longer every day. Bluetooth mesh, Kasambi, Zigbee, Li-Fi, RF control. I could go on and on. But it's for good reason, because in a world that's governed by the Internet of Things, why shouldn't our lights be too, I think?
Well, yeah, I mean, from a consumer point of view, these things are very helpful. And from a designer's perspective, they offer flexibility, scalability, future-proofing. They're great in listed buildings and heritage retrofit projects. So that controls as a system, we were talking about this the other day, and we're trying to imagine someone in 200 years' time looking back and being aghast at the number of cables that we needed to switch them on and off and to dim them. And I think there are aspects of it that need refining in sort of Wi-Fi based control systems. There's concerns about elements dropping off the system. There's Bluetooth mesh, which gives us a bit more robust network, and there's a number of different protocols. But at the moment, we're still at that stage where we're waiting for one or two of those to really stand out and become the leader and the future.
Absolutely. I mean, some people do say that a lot of this tech, wireless controls, and just even the internet, some people would say, is still unexplored. Even the full capacity of wirelessness was still to reach that point. But it is definitely the future. So from a speculative point of view, wireless controls, I think, is quite
on the tick
quite
list.
important. Yeah. Now, we talked about wireless controls, but I mean, if that excites you, then wireless lighting is going to absolutely enthrall you. I'm not talking here about battery operated lights. When I say wireless lights, I'm talking about a modern version of the Tesla coil, or, induction, where your downlights, a world where your downlights and coffers don't actually need cables at all running to them. Now, wireless charging pads is something that we're familiar with, so I'll start there. Although the Apple AirPower, Emilio and I were discussing it the other day, it never did make it to market because of technological constraints. I think Apple like to get everything perfect, but there's others that have made it to market. If wireless controls are in their infancy, then, I mean, wireless lighting is yet a fetus, but the power that it holds is incomprehensible. It falls into two categories. One is near field and the other is far field. Now, near field is non-radiative, and power is transferred over short distances by magnetic fields using inductive coupling, as with the phone charger. In far field or radiative techniques, also called power beaming, which I think is quite a cool phrase, power beaming. Power is transferred by electromagnetic radiation, like microwaves or laser beams. Now, these techniques can transport energy for longer distances, but they have to be aimed correctly. So it is very much, absolutely in its infancy, but this is something that really excites me.
And this is technology that's being used in sort of satellite design and passing power from one satellite to another at the moment. But it really excites me, the idea of getting this into the construction industry through one means or another, and having not wanting to put people out of a job. I'm sure there's a whole other industry that will be born out of it, but I think it's just a really sensible and it kind of cuts out all of the embedded energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we've talked about fittings now, I think, Emilio. That's sort of our summary of light fittings and lighting controls. But I think perhaps it's a good idea if we talk about lighting design as well in the past 60 years.
Yeah, we've got a couple of examples of some products or design installations, if you like, which use technologies from the past. And I've just found this really interesting. So a lot of people in our studio have sort of seen this, and I looked into it in a bit more detail, but these are the Moonlight Towers. Now, this I'd like to sort of direct people towards a website called Low Tech Magazine. It's got some really interesting information on it, on this type of technology. But the Moonlight Tower is essentially devised to use the arc lamp. This was developed in the 1800s by a chap called Sir Humphrey Davy, and the driver really for him creating the arc lamp was basically to find a way to stop using flame lamps in mines because they kept blowing up, and he created the carbon arc lamp, and it preceded incandescent by a good 50 years or so. His timing was good, so the product was good technology for the time. It wasn't too advanced. It could be applied, but unfortunately he didn't get to see it sort of reach the height of its popularity. So he died in 1850, and that's when it really started to catch on. So you had in the late 1880s, you had carbon arc lamps lighting up the Eiffel Tower at the Expo. You had them mounted to buildings in Paris and London, and in the US, where obviously things are often bigger and better. They created 100-meter high towers with dozens of carbon arc lamps on the top, and it was a huge step forward. Really, it was about a third of the price of gas lighting, which was the main alternative at the time. And towards the end of the 20th century, there were about 500,000 of these carbon arc Moonlight Towers in the US. So it was really popular, and a massive sort of staple. So it would have been what we would have seen just every day as part of our normal life. But very quickly it fell out of favor, and towards the end of the 20th century, buildings became a lot taller, and that's with the different construction techniques coming in. So towns where these were employed, you'd have one half of the street that was brightly lit, and the other half would be in a shadow. So then they only became used in smaller peripheral parts of towns. And then the sort of curtains were spelt for it really when the incandescent lamp became really cost effective. So it had a relatively short service life of 60 years or so, but then when we look at the tungsten lamp, it's not far off it either, because that's that had about 60 years or so being the main light source that we use, and then fluorescent and other sources started to take charge.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then we've got one more project here. So this is looking at a slightly different type of design and use of light. And I love this. It's a combination of old and new, and it's a bit of a mad idea. And this is an installation in a town called Rjukan in Norway. And this town in particular is situated in a sort of 1,800-meter deep valley. So it doesn't see the sun between, I think it's September and March every year. No direct sunlight whatsoever. And here we're looking at a sort of 50 square meter heliostat mirror mounted about 500 meters up a hillside. And it's basically to kind of bounce sunlight back into this small town. And I mean, I love it because the founder of Rjukan, a chap called Sam Eid, and his statue's there in the middle of that square. He was an industrialist. He founded Norsk Hydro, which is a huge renewable energy company in Norway. They also make aluminium, but I think they like to sort of lever on the renewable side of things. But he conceived this idea 100 years ago for his town and settlement, where they would have a huge mirror that would bounce light back in. But the technology didn't exist. And here's an example of the technology catching up with an idea further down the line. So in 2013, an artist called Martin Anderson created Sudsve, and there was a lot of chat in and amongst the local village and town about this really expensive, well over £500,000 installation being a bit much for for what it was actually delivering. But actually, it's not only has it been really well received by the inhabitants who like to kind of bask in the sunlight, it's also had some really good positive, but unknown positive effects, like tourism's gone up, and that sort of has put the town on the map in terms of its name. So I love the purity of it and the emotional side of it and the contact. But one of the cons, and it can be said here with these two images, is that obviously it can't be used at night. You can't store the energy, and much like this Carpenter Loring's installation in Washington, DC, which is a huge light pipe in a 10-story atrium in a law firm, it's still really considered art. So it's not really considered, it kind of reflects really our approach, our attitude towards renewable technology. So is it the future? I mean, the image on the right hand here is a company website some of you might be familiar with called Parans, and they create kits, or they sell kits of heliostats which pipe light using fiber optics into deep plan areas in buildings. And I remember being fascinated with this when I started out in lighting sort of 15 years ago. And the technology's evolved, and they're still about as a company. And you'll get lead credits if you implement this in. So it is being rewarded, but is it the future? I don't think so. I think, to use your Tony Stark analogy, it's like comparing a solar farm with a fusion reactor in terms of harnessing the sun's energy. It's perhaps not quite going to be the solution to our question for the future of lighting.
Yeah. I find it really funny how most, speculative design is initially looked upon as art. It really tells you what people's attitudes are, not just towards, as you said, sustainability, but also just speculation. Because it's such an unknown. Calling it art, I think, is safe.
It is safe, and I think there's some drivers really behind new technologies and new products, and creativity, the sort of desire to create things, is definitely one of those drivers. But as we've been looking through this, and as we look at the sort of products to come on this our slide deck, there's a few factors that appear commonplace really when these technological jumps are sort of successful. I think timing is really important, as we could sort of see with with the heliostat being a bit ahead of its time there. Problem solving, or some kind of market driver, I think that's really key. Is it going to save energy? Is it going to facilitate industry somehow because people can work later or read for longer? And imagination. I think there has to be a sort of strong human aspect of imagination to make that leap, and you get the once in a lifetime or once in a century mind like Edison and Tesla. And I think you need a combination of all three of these to take technology and design to the next level. Yes,
absolutely. So, speaking of sort of technology that's going to make it to the next level, now we're going to get to the more speculative, the truly speculative part of our discussion. A bit more out there, absolutely.
Seraphina, Emilio, before you move on, there are a couple of questions which have been quite interesting that have come in, and I think it's probably just worth touching on them now, if that's okay. The first is was quite an interesting question and very apt. In an age where we're burning down 5G foam masks because people think they're transmitting coronavirus, how do you expect to convince people that induction lighting is the future?
Weirdly, Emilio and I were talking about this just yesterday, where every time that a new technology comes along, people are reticent to accept it. I was reading about the radio, where the first time that the radio was invented, people wanted to conceal it into furniture. So they didn't want to see wires, they didn't want to see hardware, they wanted to make it almost seem like it was part of their furniture, their setup, because they were so scared that it would cause trouble. And I was also telling Emilio about when microwaves came along. I think at some point my own parents, and I mean, I'm not, I was born I'm a millennial, so this shouldn't be something that happened with me. But my parents were considering whether to buy a microwave for two young girls in the house, because microwaves, you know, the microwave instead of the microwave waves, people weren't quite sure what to make of them at that point. So I understand where this sort of urge to burn down 5G towers comes from. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, but I understand it. I think eventually people are just going to be forced to move into new tech.
Forced or encouraged. I think you have very early adopters who, you know, they're the ones who are keen to take the risk. And as designers, our job isn't to take risks with our clients' projects. Ours is to use kind of bleeding edge technology where it's appropriate, but not to use untested things. But fortunately, there's just a portion of society who just can't help themselves and are really drawn by it. And then once the benefits of these are proven, and they're kind of undeniable, then if it is a good technology, then that will come through, and then slowly those people will become more accepting of it, I think.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got a couple of other questions for you. I will. Yeah. We've got lots of questions here. I'll give you two more, and then we'll do some more at the end, if that's okay.
Okay.
Raju asked, well, what about Li-Fi technology? And then I saw somebody ask, Juan also asked, what about OLED technology? So sort of a double whammy question for you there. What about Li-Fi technology? What about OLED?
I'm happy to take part of this one. I think Li-Fi fascinated me, and one of the things that I really liked about it was the security aspect of it. So when it first came out, I read an article of it being used in banks as over Wi-Fi, because it was very directional, and you could, that sort of aspect of it meant that it made it very secure for passing information from point to point. I mean, obviously, there's a limit to how many topics we can really cover in this, and there's dozens more technologies, like the new LCD control of beam angles in products and things like that.
Yeah.
OLED, from a commercial and fit-out lighting point of view, hand on heart, I love it. But I think one of the reasons it hasn't really taken off to the extent that we thought it might when it was mentioned in the same breath as LED in the early 2000s was through architectural design, we can give the perception of a very flat aesthetic on something and a very minimal depth. And there's other much less expensive ways to achieve the effect of something having zero thickness. And often it is in a sort of decorative or a sort of accent lighting type of way.
Or artistic as well. I mean, this is another one where, LEDs are functional, OLEDs are artistic or decorative. So for a product to make that leap from being an artist or an academic's invention to being something that controls the market, as Emilio said, timing is important, but also just how much it costs, unfortunately.
And it pays off, doesn't it? On TVs, it pays off.
Yeah,
but
Samsung's got that flip phone now, the new version of the flip phone, or the divided screen phone. I think that's OLED. But yeah, for it to make it to architecture, I think there's a few steps along the way that need to be completed.
Well, I think OLED obviously fails on the kind of holy trinity, doesn't it? Really, it's too expensive. It's the lamp life isn't at quite what they thought it would be. Particularly, it degrades pretty quickly. Cost is obviously prohibitive as well, and then the actual quality of light from it isn't wonderful either. So. Okay, let's move on if that's okay, guys. And I will pick up on a
so this is where you go off the rails, Seraphina. So take it away.
Lovely. So now coming to the speculative part of our discussion. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what the Kardashev scale is, but as a lighting designer, it massively has influenced the way I think about the future. So Nikolai Kardashev put together this measure in 1961 to define a civilization's level of technological advancement. He uses 3 categories. Type 1, which is a planetary civilization, that's us. We can use and store all of the energy available on our planet. So coal, for example, wind energy, what else? Natural gas, stuff like that. A type 2 civilization, on the other hand, is a stellar civilization which can use and control energy at the scale of its stellar system or its solar system. And a type 3 civilization is called a galactic civilization, which can control energy at the scale of its entire host galaxy, which for us would be the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. I know that this has started to sound sci-fi, but bear with me. We are presently at type 1. For us to be able to make it to type 2, we would need to harness the power of the sun in a much more significant manner, with things like artificial, homegrown light, like the LED, for example, being used for minor supplementation rather than as a major source of light. Now, this can be done through Dyson swarms or Dyson rings. This is a Dyson swarm that you can see on screen, which is effectively satellites that surround the sun, slowly stripping the sun of its energy and beaming it back to Earth. Or reflective satellites that can surround the Earth and then beam energy back to us as well. Now, I said that this is something that's quite sci-fi, but it's a future that's closer than you think. Now, Emilio and I were talking about this city called Chengdu in China, which has already got plans for this, something that they're calling an artificial moon, which is a single Dyson satellite. It's a low orbit satellite that's going to be launched apparently in 2020, but I think the COVID situation has unfortunately delayed their plans. Yeah. It's effectively a giant mirror. It's a giant disk that's meant to beam energy from the sun back to Earth. But Emilio and I have found that there's a few holes in this plan.
There are a few holes, and it's amazing that they would consider. It's probably going to be one of the world's most expensive mock-ups, one way or another, because when a satellite is in low Earth orbit, it's not stationary relative or static relative to the ground below it. So the speed it's moving at means that even if it was to act as a heliostat and change its angle as it passed over one of the continents, you probably at best get 10 minutes worth of light over that particular 50-mile radius at any given time before it flew into a different orbit, and then it would be useless for that area. So we're trying to think what other perhaps functions this mirror might serve, and perhaps this is a kind of secondary use of it, I suppose, to try and get two out of one, get bang for your buck with the launch.
Yeah, and I think you need to have the sort of audacity that this little Chinese city has in order to sort of make that leap, that technological leap. So if we're, even if it does fail in 2020, it just means that from a speculative design point of view, we've got a precedent to base future exploration on.
And some of you might be wondering, well, why don't they put it into a geostationary orbit? Well, maybe not many of you, but some of you might be. But the geostationary orbit is something like 10 times greater distance than a low Earth orbit. So that does make it static, which is great. But then the sort of the physics of how far away it is and the intensity of light that you can achieve would mean it would be a lot less bright and a much smaller, over a much larger area. So the satellite itself would have to grow to something like 1 kilometer across from the 20 meters or so that it's currently designed at. To be able to provide a similar level of light. So it just starts to get very difficult. Not as hard as a Dyson swarm, though. So.
No. But, leading there, hopefully, one day.
So another sort of, speaking of space exploration, there's a lot of discussion in the media at the moment with Elon Musk about Mars exploration and sort of terraforming on Mars. So this has begun to take control of people's imaginations, and not only living on Mars but actually traveling to Mars itself is quite a long journey of over a year. There was a talk at the PLDC in Rotterdam just last year in 2019 entitled "The Lighting for Interplanetary Environments." That was by a designer called Sangil Nar, and that kind of covered the the sort of approach towards how you might deal with human-centric factors with lighting during that journey. There's a lot of interesting things to think about, because the quality of light on Mars is very different. The day length or the sol length on Mars is very similar to that of Earth, but a year takes twice as long in terms of its time to orbit the sun. So the idea of seasons and timing there are quite different. You also have about 1% of Earth's atmosphere, so that kind of combination of direct sunlight and diffuse light that we've evolved to.
Yeah, we take our clouds for granted.
Yeah, exactly, to deal with. That wouldn't be there. So it's a very different balance of. So artificial lighting, I think, would play a huge role in acclimatizing people to that change over a period of time.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. I mean, before we get to this Kardashev 2 type 2 civilization, I think we're still going to have a small period. I hope small period, maybe a long period, of innovation in artificial lighting on our own planet. So before we get to the very end of this talk, we'd like to discuss some of this sort of near future speculative design with you. I see biomimicry as the future of lighting design. And I first started thinking about biomimetics and lighting when I was doing a master's degree. Because in an academic,
a brief description of what biomimicry is, because
yes, I think so biomimicry is when designers human designers start sort of looking at the world around us. So dragonflies, for example, their wings were used as the basis of design for helicopters. I used to call dragonflies helicopter bees when I was a child. I didn't realize just how right I was back then. I think I just didn't know the word for dragonflies, so I used to call them helicopter bees. But that sort of thing, using the motion of manta rays to design robots that can go deep under the sea and do things like exploration for oil drilling, for example. But it's the idea of mimicking biology in order to make design better. That's biomimetics. So when I was doing my master's, I was actually really pleasantly surprised to see that biomimetic lighting is beginning to grow. So in 2014, this image that we've got up here is actually a render from the University of Cambridge, who put together a genetic sequence for the building blocks of bioluminescent trees. Now, they combined a marine bacterium called Vibrio fischeri to boost the production and activity of light-yielding enzymes in trees. I don't think they ever managed to grow an actual glowing tree, but they did build parts of a genome that can be used once people have the funding and resources to do something like this. I mean, yes, the tree can't be, in terms of lighting controls, it's useless because you won't ever be able to switch a tree off at night or dim it down. I don't know how you would, maybe cut down a few leaves. I don't know how that works. But as a thought experiment, as a part of speculative design, I think it's worth mentioning, definitely.
And in parts of the world where the infrastructure doesn't perhaps exist, it's an alternative. I mean, we're sort of our design judgment's very clouded. We live in the 1%, and we're very true. We've got everything at our fingertips in terms of technology and infrastructure. And I think that human society maybe still can benefit from things that are off grid like this.
Absolutely. Now, coming back to practice, so this was more, the academic side of things, but this is a tech that did make that leap, like the LED, for example. Philips, who we mentioned before, in 2011, they developed this BioLight, which you can see on the right of this slide. It's powered by the luciferin that's found in glowworms and in dinoflagellates. Now, some of you might be familiar with that image on the left of glowing bacteria, or I think it's glowing algae, actually, pardon me. They wash onto the sand with the water, and every time that you step on them, or every time that they're subjected to wave motion, these little organisms effectively freak out and emit a little bit of light. Now, the wavelengths that these guys manage to produce are blue and green primarily at the moment, which is not exactly useful for wide-scale application. But the one thing that I'd like to remember with this is that the LED started off as blue as well, and now we've got white light coming out of it. So in the future, who knows? You know, this might be the new LED.
I love the idea of of it being used as water features, or just it's slightly harder to kind of think of the applications, but I suppose this is where the innovation and the creative mind comes into it.
Absolutely.
So if we move on to sort of staying on the luminescent side of things, something which has developed, again, relatively recently to a degree that it can be applied, is electroluminescent paint. So this isn't bioluminescent, it doesn't store energy and then release it later. It has a current passing through it. And I think, again, wavelength of light is not fantastic, but again, as Seraphina mentioned, I think that's something that can be improved over time. It's got terrible color rendering. We don't have any control over the beam angle. We can't dim it yet. So there's a lot of things holding this particular technology back at the moment. And it's very difficult and expensive to apply. But as with all new technologies, that is often the case, I think. But it's still very popular. And, I think as with the Rucan heliostats we spoke about, the artistic endeavors will be what brings this into the sort of more wider known community. And the image on the right here is sort of paint on power cables, and these have been around for a few years now, haven't they? And I really,
they have.
I mean, in terms of 3D printing of buildings and the construction process, it really excites me again, and I would love to see this take a step forward sooner rather than later.
Yeah, there's a great Business Insider video. We'll send a link around maybe later, Paul, that sort of describes this bare conductive electricity. It's really cool. You can paint it directly onto your walls. You need no cabling sort of inside the structure of your building. So it's definitely something to bear in mind when it comes to speculative lighting design. So talking about artists, Emilio, would you like to talk about?
We've spoken about light a lot, I think. And crossing over onto paint, I think it would be a crime not to talk about Vantablack and Black 3.0. So we need to understand how we can control light, and as a lighting designer, anything that can harness or control light better is a useful tool for us as well. So Vantablack, for those that haven't heard of it, is developed by an artist called Anish Kapoor, and it uses carbon nanotubes, which are very, very carefully applied to a material, very delicate and very difficult process to achieve. But it traps something like 99.6% of the light that hits the surface, and so much so it makes it look like you're just looking into a black hole. So this is an excellent innovation, but the sort of interesting story around it, really, because Anish Kapoor basically patented this and banned all other artists from using it. And there was one particular artist called Stuart Semple, I think, and he sort of as a sort of reaction to that ban, he invented, I think, Pink 2.0. I think we've got a slide for that. And he made this market. This is the pinkest pink on the market, and he made this available free of charge for everyone to use, except for Anish Kapoor. And every time you buy a pot of this, you have to sign an affidavit to say that you won't issue it to Anish Kapoor, that you aren't associated with him. And so it's become a bit of a spat between the two designers. Stuart's since gone on to develop another product called Black 3.0, which is a paint which is much easier to apply than Vantablack. It can be applied to lots of different materials. It's very robust, and that absorbs 99.5% of light. And again, sort of carrying on the spat, he's made that available free of charge for all artists. It's something like £12 a tube, so it's not expensive, with the exception of course, Inish Kapoor, who's not allowed to use it. And I think, you know, this sort of spat has raised the profile of both artists and both products in their own right. So it's been an interesting thing to follow. But, you know, I think that freedom of use and that ability to, you know, to share IP is, I think, again, that's probably, you know, a really important factor in how successful products are going to be in the future. And just on that sort of topic, I think, you know, with lots of sort of, this is a technology essentially that we're looking at in front of us that's been made available, and the IP has been shared. But you know, even with protocols like Bluetooth Mesh or DALI 2, they're open source, and the designers or the people that conceive these are not looking to make money on the protocol per se. They want to make it an economically viable product for other people to use and to create its own industry. And I think, looking at the sort of the future of design and the future of lighting, it seems that, you know, cloud-based subscriptions and tech services from a control perspective are going to be the way that that we go, rather than being focused on just product.
Absolutely. I mean, that's almost our discussion really come to an end there. But you know, before we go and before we take all of your questions, we'd just like to show you a little video clip of what we like to call personal light, or, you know, instead of it being quite communal or something like a street lamp that illuminates your street in front of you, with you personally having no control over it. Lighting drones that you can command at the flick of a button to follow you around a room are quite innovative as well. So bear with me one moment. I'm just going to get this video playing here.
So what I love about this is by a company called Crazy Drones too, and it's the idea of creating something three-dimensional, not just relying on the architecture and being able to interact with the source, but being able to use light in a medium and give it the mobility that it doesn't currently have on a new dimension. And it's come along so incredibly quickly. I remember seeing this company for the first time at the Seoul Olympics opening ceremony, and I could barely believe my eyes that the level of coordination and the level of detail that they're able to achieve.
Yes, indeed.
Brilliant.
Amelia, Seraphina, thank you so much for that. That was genuinely a really interesting talk. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
And biomimicry, it's a technology that's growing. Never let it be said that our humour is not subtle and sophisticated. So before we move on to some questions, and I think there are a few questions there, just a reminder to everybody that we have two more webinars coming up next week. On Tuesday, it's Sophie and Dan Blaker, our creative director. It's a really interesting topic on thinking sideways, the creativity in design and how to muster creativity. So for all of the designers that log in with loyalty, please do come back and see that on Tuesday. And then on Friday, I'm both excited and dreading. We are going to attempt an online Pecha Kucha event, God help us. So that's on Friday of next week. So please do join in. I'm also going to post in the link very shortly, or in the chat box very shortly, a link to a really interesting blog by a guy called Brad Kerner, who's ex-Philips, who's now out on his own. He does a lot of sort of conversations, lots of articles on there about the future of light and lighting and new technologies as well. So just to run through a few questions for you and a few comments. Where can I go back to? So phosphor, fluorescent, high frequency current. Juana asked, is this fluorescent? I don't know what that was about. That was probably a little bit further. But Terry John did say maybe in future grow and I'm going to move on. Maybe in future we could grow and nurture our own bioluminescent light sources. Thoughts about growing lights at home?
Yes. I'd be in. I can't keep much other than succulents alive right now, so I'm not sure how good I'd be at growing my own light. But for someone who's got a greener thumb than me, I think that's great.
Yeah, I think it puts a bit more of an onus on maintenance, doesn't it?
It definitely does.
And getting the quantifiable lights out of it are.
I mean, green walls are so hard to maintain. Imagine, bioluminescent walls coming in.
I love the idea of Philips with a warehouse full of gardeners. I love that.
Oh, yes.
Shauna Callaghan said, how do you view the development of intelligent computer-driven lighting design? What is the future of you?
The future of you. Oh.
So is this using AI to actually design lighting installations rather than? I think we're probably in a lot more trouble than a lot of us think we are for basic hotel and apartment lighting layouts. I don't think we'll be that far off the suggestion being very close to what we actually need. So I think where we're going to keep adding value is in the unique spaces and what those points are that we input into the system in the first place. So, we get to decide which surface we want to light and to what level. I think AI can decide how that's achieved very efficiently. So there's still going to be a bit of work for us to do, but yeah, bits of our job are at risk of being redundant. I don't mind if that's load schedules or specs.
I think any lighting designer would be very happy to get rid of load schedules and cost schedules.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Really good. Lots of thank yous, lots of lovely positive comments. So that's really good. And not so many. Oh, somebody did ask about the pink is pink, but I think Terry already responded on that, and the Vanta Black. So, I mean, are there any instances where pink has been used?
Yeah, Stuart Semple.
I really want to get a hold of it myself. I was looking the other day to see if Amazon's got it, but I didn't get Stuart Semple's link. So, but I'd like to, yeah.
Yeah, have a look. I think
what makes pink pink, Emilio? How is it the pinkest pink?
The paint technology. I mean, there's actually, if you look, if you go to Stuart Semple's homepage, he's got some really good. Because he's also invented the glitteriest glitter, I think, as well. And before Black 3.0, he invented Black 2.0. So he's constantly looking at devising and working with the different mixes of chemicals, and it's a very you think a paint is much easier than electronics and componentry, but I think the technology involved in paints is the science on that is up there, and it's a very tricky thing to achieve. But yeah, have a look at his site and hopefully, I mean, I'm not sure, I haven't actually looked at buying it. I think we're looking at getting some for our new office, Paul.
If we ever get in there.
Yeah.
Yes, in the after.
Jess Gallagher made a really interesting point here, just from the ILP. The history of technology development is so male dominated. She thinks the future will be more diverse and feminist. This should lead to more creative solutions. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Emilio is a self-confessed feminist, so I'm going to defer to him on this.
And as a self-confessed feminist, I would like you to answer, Seraphina.
No, Jess, I think that's great. You're absolutely right. The future is female, and the fact that Emilio and I have contributed on this, possibly wouldn't have been something that someone of my background, presenting a webinar 60 years ago, I don't think that would have happened. But this opportunity is available to me today. So just coming from even a personal point of view, yeah, it's as a woman, thank you for this opportunity.
On a personal level, I hope that the future is not feminist, and I hope it is not male dominated. I hope it is a future of equality, where we're all equal and people are employed because they are good enough, not based on sex or creed. So Mike Tan said maybe we can use light, which is ultraviolet light, to help the world kill corona. There's a topic for you. Donald Trump injecting light, go.
My sister was saying this the other day, because she's a doctor, unlike me, who's a designer. But when our two minds come together, we're so different. She always sort of talks about stuff that she's read, etc., and I always talk about things that I invent more than I don't know facts. But she was talking from a fact-based point of view. Apparently, UV light, although it can't kill coronaviruses, it can weaken them. So there is something there.
Yep.
You know,
Hopefully it can weaken Donald Trump as well.
I mean, yeah, have we got any ways? I read in the paper today, he's talking about injecting light into people. Is there a future in injecting light?
I don't know.
Yeah,
He's a man who points to his head when he's talking about his intellect, so I'm not really sure.
Yeah, all of our US
discuss.
visas have been cancelled right now.
I would be delighted to shove a light bulb where the sun doesn't shine. Right, let's move on very quickly. Sean said, yeah, only at very specific wavelengths. Getting back to something serious, yes, agree. So, Sandra has asked. She said she came late. Yes, this webinar will be up on our YouTube channel by Monday. Certainly, it'll be up by close of play Monday. We hope. The previous webinars are also up on our YouTube channel already. If you look into the corner of the chat box at the top, there's a little note that says our YouTube channel is here. Click on that. That will take you to our YouTube channel. Good. I think that's probably everything then. That's been a really fun webinar. I really enjoyed it. So thank you to you both. Thank you to everybody for attending.
Yes,
please do check out our social media channels. If you want to come and continue that debate, please do tweet us or contact us on Instagram or drop us an email. Seraphina and Emilio would be delighted to pick up the debate with you. Otherwise, we will see you here on Tuesday, 12:30 British summertime. Have a really wonderful and safe weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Brilliant. Bye everyone.